During Anime Expo 2025, we had the chance to sit down with Naoki Yoshida, director of Final Fantasy XIV, to discuss community outreach, attending Anime Expo, and the state of the game as a whole. First of all, we see the fit, Yoshi P. Yeah, we see the fit. Hello everybody. I am Jmulls, and we have a new interview from RPGSite with Yoshi P. Now, we don't need to read all of this, but I'll leave a link in the description down below because not all of it pertains to Final Fantasy XIV. So, let's start with this paragraph. Of course, Anime Expo is all about manga and anime, but that's not to say there's nothing connecting those fan bases with ours. Everybody has been so warm and welcoming, and so many members of the 14 community came together for Anime Expo as well. Part of the hesitation previously stemmed from not knowing if there was room for a near singular focus on games. This is going into why they didn't really have much of a presence at Anime Expo before this. Was it really okay for so much of Square Enix's presence to be centered around Final Fantasy XIV and MMO? After this experience, it seems likely that Yoshida would like to make more public appearances in the future, without being so rigid about what may be the best avenue to do so. Now, I know this section doesn't particularly pertain to the game itself, but it does pertain to public appearances that Yoshi P and I assume Final Fantasy XIV will be making in the future, which I do think has some relevance here. The next paragraph reads, I think it's the next paragraph, my memory's terrible. It is the next paragraph, yeah? Verification, validation. I think we made a barrier for ourselves by trying to separate our audience into anime fans, manga fans, and of course, game fans. I think there's a real benefit in breaking that wall down, like Chris Jericho. I added that part in. Rather than limiting our presence to corporate-facing or business-facing events, I think it's nice to spend more time interacting with these communities directly. We had over 2,000 people line up to attend our panel, so many that not everyone was able to get in. It's wonderful how warm and receptive everyone was. I think it's always important to just ground ourselves with the fact that there's still a lot of people out there that love Final Fantasy XIV. And I know we've been talking, especially on this channel, a lot about the negative side of things. Because at the end of the day, despite the fact that on this channel a lot, we talk about some issues we have with Final Fantasy XIV, where we want the game to go in the future as well, it's all grounded, at least for me at least. It's built on a foundational love for this game, and that I want to see this game to get bigger and better. And while there's still a lot of people out there that love Final Fantasy XIV, don't get me wrong, there's also quite a few people that have become a bit disillusioned with the state of Final Fantasy XIV right now, as this next paragraph gets into. And that we've been talking on this channel for a while now. For Yoshida, who rarely gives such public appearances, and even rarely still outside of Japan, the talk comes at an interesting time for his career. Final Fantasy XIV, having completed its original story spanning 10 years, has struggled to find steady footing as it lays the groundwork for its next 10 years, which started with Final Fantasy XIV Dawntrail. While Square Enix does not release official numbers for player activity, both Steam concurrent user numbers and player run census data that we've talked about before, namely the player run census data from Lucky Banjo, I'll leave a link in the description down below to that, suggest a larger than normal drop compared to previous expansions' standard post-launch lull. Even without official numbers, during the most recent letter from the producer live broadcast, Yoshida and the team directly acknowledged a growing sense of complacency, too much standardization with how the team handles development, even when better solutions could have been possible. That may have become one driving factor for what many players have deemed an uneven rollout of new content for the game. I don't think it's particularly surprising that Final Fantasy XIV has gotten to a state like this, because you get updates for the game every 4 months or so at this point in time at least. And yeah, for us as players, that is a long time, but when you're actually trying to develop content for the game, it is a really strict deadline. And you have to work patches ahead. So things can be set in stone, and then you get feedback coming in that people don't actually like this one thing you're doing, but you're already working on the next thing. You can't just throw all that work away because you're operating on a strict time limit here. Which is why I've been saying, hey, for a lot of these more systemic changes that at least I want to see, and what I imagine a lot of you guys want to see as well, job changes, changes to the patch cycle, how frequently stuff gets updated, or just how early in an expansion's patch cycle stuff comes online, that is stuff we'll likely not see until 8.0 and 8.x, because it takes time for that feedback to be taken into account and to come online, if they even decide to go in that direction to begin with. I'm actually in the process of editing one of the hot take videos that we like to do on this channel, and I talk about a phenomenon that this interview is going to get into as well, where you kind of have two warring sides in the community right now. You have people that think the game is catering too much to the casual demographic and not making the game hard enough or complicated enough and therefore engaging enough. And you have the other side of the aisle saying the game is too focused on hardcore content and is not catering to the casual side of things enough. And you have both of these sides that exist, and they're very loud on the internet. And when you release content that caters to one of the groups specifically, you're going to upset the other one, so you're always getting this very loud noise feedback of people not liking the current state of the game. I don't think it's an excuse for a lot of the issues that Final Fantasy XIV has right now, but it goes to show that there is no reality where you can perfectly please everyone, because a game like Final Fantasy XIV, for the longest time, and still does, appeals to a wide variety of players that want different things out of Final Fantasy XIV. Some people are here just for the ultimate experience. They just want challenges that are as difficult as humanly possible, and that is what they like out of the game, right? That is their adrenaline rush. That is what does it for them. And then there's other people who just want a nice, relaxing place to just unwind, escape from reality for a bit, do some glamour, maybe some roleplay, maybe the occasional dungeon, a normal raid, stuff that is not a grueling or agonizing experience, just something to allow themselves to immerse themselves in the world of Final Fantasy XIV. One side isn't inherently better than the other, and I think in the middle, you have a large group of people that want a bit of both, or at least they want the option to have both. And I think the final part of this paragraph perfectly goes into what I talk about a lot, when it's just, this is a game that for a lot of people, we have played for years. And no matter the way you play Final Fantasy XIV, no matter what you want to get out of the game, this is an issue that can affect a lot of people, and I think this goes to show why we've seen so much negative reception to Dawntrail right now. It's because it was not necessarily unique to Dawntrail and what Dawntrail did by itself, besides having a disappointing story for a lot of people. It's merely the straw that broke the camel's back. Even without official numbers, during the most recent letter from the producer live broadcast, Yoshida and the team directly acknowledged a growing sense of complacency, too much standardization with how the team handles development, even when better solutions could have been possible. That may have become one driving factor for what many players have deemed an uneven rollout of new content for the game. It's just, the content cadence and the patch cycle for Final Fantasy XIV feels hyper-repetitive. And the way I like to describe this is, you can have a favorite meal, but for a lot of people, if that's the only thing you ever eat, you may enjoy it for a bit. Because like, oh cool, more of the thing that I already like. Yummy. You eat it day after day, then month after month, and now year after year. At some point, your palate's just gonna grow bored of the thing that you know you like. And that if you took a break from it, and you come back to it, chances are you'll probably still like it, but when it's the only thing you're eating, it just gets kind of stale, and you want variety, you want a different spice, you want something to mix up the experience. That is where I think Final Fantasy XIV really needs to go in the future. It needs to be willing to take large foundational risks, and not just in terms of, oh, we're going to do something like an island sanctuary. You need to be really ballsy when it comes to, how does this new functionality actually work and function? But it goes back to that previous problem that we were just talking about, where it's like, this is a live service game, technically, and it's a game that, I know this went up in Dawntrail from how frequently patches used to be released, but there's a new patch every 4 months. Heck, if you count the 0.5 patches, it's pretty much every 2 months. Even when us as players don't perceive it to be a lot of work or content, that is still a lot to do for game development, I can only imagine, when you're operating with that content cadence. I think a good point of comparison right now could be, say, World of Warcraft, where they have this essentially 8-week content cadence, where about every 8 weeks they have something coming out. And yeah, it's a lot of content, but the problem we run into there is, quite a bit of the content that actually comes out isn't that engaging. Some of it is, don't get me wrong, but quite a bit of it is just kind of filler stuff. It's not particularly engaging, it's just menial work. And on top of that, because of how frequently that game gets updated, like clockwork nowadays, every patch day is essentially broken. And it's a smorgasbord of, oh, what broke this time? What issues am I gonna run into now? And it's a really big problem that World of Warcraft is running into right now. It's not an enviable position, because, like is the case with a lot of game development, at least from what I read, you can't just scale development up with more people, because development doesn't work like that. Just because you throw twice as many developers at a single feature doesn't mean development of that feature speeds up twice as much. That's just not how code works. And the simple reality is that a lot of consumers just simply don't care. They just want to be pleased. They want an escape. They want something to engage them and to grab their attention. And in the year 2025, in the modern day, there's a lot of things vying for your attention. Whether that be social media, things like TikTok, other games, single-player games, multiplayer games, live service games. There's a lot of things vying for your attention. Not to mention the swath of gacha games we get nowadays. There's a lot of games that are high quality, and they're good, where if you want a game to really dump a bunch of time and energy in, it's no longer the case where there's just like a couple of big dogs at the top of the mountain, or for the longest time, mainly just World of Warcraft. There's a lot of competition, not just in the MMO scene. There's a lot of competition. And this goes back to what I was talking about before. I think, like, when it comes to 8.0, because I don't see the large systemic changes coming online before 8.0 or 8.x. I think when that next expansion hits, that can be a clean slate. And if they're willing to take a lot of risks and to try a bunch of new things and to break up this, like, content cadence, to break up this sense of stagnation, that can go a long way, because I think the time to strike is now. I think at the end of the day, the reason we still see so much discussion, so much conversation, and so many opinions about Final Fantasy XIV, both positive and negative, is because at the end of the day, people still care about the game. And I think the moment when things truly fall off a cliff, which I don't know if they ever will, by the way, will be when conversation just largely dies down about the game. Because that is when apathy has fully set in. When people just simply stop caring and no longer feel a strong emotion one way or the other about the game. And I do think for a lot of people, if the game continues in this direction, a lot of people out there, not all, but a lot, will end up feeling apathetic if they haven't already begun feeling like that. Continuing with the article, one of the core stated goals for Dawntrail was to focus on the MMO aspect of Final Fantasy XIV, which I do think is a good thing the game needs to lean more into. It's just, we can do more with it, in my opinion. While patch 7.2 and its various sub-patches have been well received by and large, the community hasn't been free of any number of complaints about how content like a Cold Crescent has been implemented. Understandably, things are more complicated than one might initially think. Absolutely. Striking a balance to delivering enough content for all types of players is perhaps easier said than done. Now quoting, "We are trying to work within a specific timescale and trying to satisfy both types of players, note casual players that rarely engage with raid content, and more hardcore players that do, end bracket. At the same time, even if we were to double our number of developers, I don't think we'd necessarily be able to double our output while trying to maintain the same level of quality." End quote. Yeah, exactly what I was talking about before. They're operating on a time schedule. Things are already set in stone. Patches ahead. And just because things are really starting to come to a head now with Dawntrail, they can't just about face and completely change the directory of the game overnight and have it be ready for the next patch. That's just wildly unrealistic, and if they were to rush a lot of these other systems or any of these like supposed changes a lot of people want, if they were to just rush them out the door, chances are they wouldn't be functional, or there'd be a bunch of glitches and bugs and the game would probably break and stuff like that. And that would also not be good for the overall state of the game. And as I've talked about before, yeah, it's a bit of a lose-lose situation for now, but if you hold your cards to your chest, take that feedback into account, decide how you want to act on that feedback, and do a lot more systemic changes to the overall formula of the game. Smaller ones intermittently, but when we get to a big new expansion, that is a prime opportunity to enact a lot of these more philosophical changes that people want to see. Speaking of doing some changes intermittently every now and then, as an example of how the team is trying to strike that balance, Yoshida brings up the Deep Dungeon planned for 7.3. We think this will appeal to a more casual playstyle, but we're also anticipating that more hardcore players who might find it less challenging will feel it's lacking. I know just from watching community reactions to 7.3, a lot of people that I'm seeing at least are a bit disappointed by what 7.3 is offering. Especially if they're more like hardcore raider, or they really live for that harder content the game can provide. 7.3 doesn't really have much in the way of that. There is no new ultimate, there is no new savage tier, anything like that. We're not getting a new chaotic raid. And instead of providing actually nothing, what they're at least attempting to do to see how it sticks is this. This is why we're adding an additional extra hard boss you can fight after reaching floor 99. And like, who knows how they'll stick the landing when it comes to this, right? We don't know how it's going to reward players for clearing it. We don't know the actual difficulty of it. We don't know how fun or mechanically intensive the fight actually is. We don't know how easy it is to actually get into the fight to begin with. Could we have another Fork Tower similar situation on our hands? Where it's like, realistically, how many people are clearing to floor 99 of this thing? Time will tell. We don't know right now. That being said, regardless of how the team expects content to be received, that doesn't necessarily mean it will land that way with the community. Absolutely. You can release content that is designed to appeal to a certain demographic, but that's not a guarantee that demographic is going to like it. Deep dungeons, I tend to find, are content in Final Fantasy XIV that some people either become absolutely obsessed with, or the content is largely ignored, or treated just as an alternate leveling device, instead of really focusing in on that type of content specifically. I have largely kind of ignored deep dungeons for most of my tenure with Final Fantasy XIV. I have gone in them before, and I have done them, but I've never been that serious about them. Nor have previous deep dungeons particularly piqued my curiosity or interest in wanting to dump a bunch of hours into them. I imagine, though, there will be a group of people out there that, kind of like me, or maybe even more so, people that just have not done a lot of deep dungeons before, if any, that are looking ahead to the one coming in 7.3 and wanting to try out that piece of content. Because, have you tried going back to do the one that was brought into the game with Endwalker? My god, that queue time is outrageous. I tried to do it on stream until I really learned, yeah, this queue time, okay. Well, good news, GTA 7 might be out before this queue pops. Last week, Final Fantasy XIV had emergency maintenance in order to implement some of the changes that the team had previously announced that the Occult Crescent would receive with patch 7.3. Fork Tower Blood was designed to be more like Baldesion Arsenal, a raid from the Eureka field operation in Stormblood. Out the feedback that the Bosnian Southern Front, Shadowbringers equivalent, didn't task players with engaging with the world as much as a sort of middle ground. Almost immediately, however, the feedback started pouring in that players found attempting the Fork Tower Blood, a Gold Crescent 48-player raid, was even more frustrating than Baldesion Arsenal, which the team had not anticipated. They've talked before about their supposed fix for this type of stuff in the future, back at the live letter saying, hey, when we get the next raid for this, we're going to do a normal mode and a savage version, which I think is a good middle ground, personally. Again, we see the drip, Yoshi P. We see the fit. Does that shirt say MSG? Man likes seasoned food. I can respect it. I do feel that Fork Tower Blood was a misstep in development. It wasn't meant to be hardcore content, so to speak. The intention was that it might be more difficult at first, but over time, more players might be willing to take on the challenge. Yet, in the end, nothing even matters. We made it too difficult for players to even get into the raid in the first place. That's why we're making adjustments with 7.3, and why some of those adjustments were pushed even earlier than that. That's why we're revising our roadmap to account for this feedback in patch 7.5. Yoshida also reflected that the team may have been putting too much focus on a player's individual responsibility, and how a single person's failure could have such a profound impact on the whole party. They regret that they weren't able to strike that balance they had intended for the content. I think, yeah, absolutely, in content that you're designing for a lot of people to want to partake in, no one wants to go into something they haven't done before, or have done before but don't fully know, and fear in the back of their minds if they make one mistake, they're holding everyone back. That just adds a layer of unnecessary friction, in my opinion, that causes a lot of people to not want to even try or attempt this content to begin with. because they don't want to be a burden. They don't want to have that moment where, for whatever reason, they make a mistake and the entire party's dead. Even if that doesn't actually happen, if the perception that can happen exists, that will prevent a lot of people from wanting to even take that first step. It goes without saying that it's not easy developing an MMO, and it's clear that having a chance to connect with the community more directly has been a weight off Yoshida's shoulders. While the current state of Final Fantasy XIV might be rockier than anticipated, it's clear that above all else, that the team is doing all it can to meet their fans' expectations, even if the realities of development can be difficult to convey at times. In the end, nothing even matters. All they can ask is for the community to put their faith in the team, just as the team is making a renewed effort to more directly engage with the community. It's too early to say how the rest of Dawntrail's support will be received, but I hope that players and developers alike can be satisfied with how things turned out when all is said and done. A rather optimistic send-off there, and one that I do hope turns out to be right, though I don't think much will really shift in terms of overall opinion and sentiment when it comes to 7.3, unless there's just a bunch of massive changes with the deep dungeon that I'm not expecting to actually happen. Who knows, though? I mean, going back to the first is a really cool concept. I like that. I like the setting for the new deep dungeon. I'm all on board for that. And who knows, maybe it's a banger. I'll be diving into it, absolutely. Especially now that I got Final Fantasy XIV running on my Steam Deck. Video in the future on that one. By the way, I'm learning how to play this game with controller. Send help. But yeah, especially when it comes to, like, overall feedback, I can be certain that they're receiving. Not just in the course of Dawntrail, but in previous expansions too. You get a lot of voices that all want different things. Do the people want more hard content, or do the people want more just Brain Dead Easy content, or do the people want some kind of mix of the two, or do they want content to be in the middle of that? How big are these respective groups? It can become a bit of a mess, and it's an unenviable position, let's call it. But as I've said before, I think the biggest issue plaguing Final Fantasy XIV right now is sheer repetition, and not taking enough risks, and being afraid to try anything really out there, mechanically speaking. I think the Phantom Job system introduced with the Occult Crescent was a really cool idea. While I personally wasn't a fan of the actual abilities we got with a lot of the Phantom Jobs, I like the concept itself, and I hope it's something they explore more in the future. I would love to see that system iterated on, not just within the Occult Crescent, but possibly take that idea and add it to other pieces of content and just see how far we can take this idea. I would love to see Final Fantasy XIV go in that direction. Try new things. Be bold. Be outrageous. Don't just stick to the formula that has always worked, because over time, if people only eat that one thing, they'll just simply get bored of it. And I think we're seeing that really come to a head with Dawntrail. The dam burst with the main story not living up to expectations for a lot of people. And everything else just kind of fell as a result, like a house of dominoes. Yes, I said dominoes, not a house of cards. We'll save that metaphor for how 8.0 goes. I don't think Final Fantasy XIV is like unfixable or dead or anything like that. MMOs can change drastically going from one expansion to the other. We have seen this since time immemorial. We have seen this in Final Fantasy XIV. Heck, I mean, look at just the history of the game. We went from Heavensward to Stormblood. Stormblood wasn't as well received by quite a few people. Then we had Shadowbringers. And heck, even in the Stormblood patches, those were bangers compared to 0.0 as well. Then we had Shadowbringers, which was a lot of people's favorite time in the entire game. Then we had Endwalker, which was a polarizing expansion by itself. Though I think most people really enjoyed the story. It's one of my favorite times in all of Final Fantasy XIV. Though the patch cycle and what we got, a lot of the issues that I have with Dawntrail follow the same issues I had with Endwalker in that regard. But, like, look at how much and how drastically community perception has changed going from just Endwalker to Dawntrail. I don't see why that can go in the opposite direction, going from Dawntrail to 8.0. Final Fantasy XIV and the team behind it have created some of my fondest gaming memories, some of my favorite moments in all of gaming. 7.2, narratively speaking, was a massive step in the right direction and fully brought me back in to be engaged with the narrative and the characters. I don't see why the rest of the game can't also have that same tender love and care. It just is not going to come immediately, because it's unrealistic. But I do feel as if they really, really, really want to get the message out that they are listening and that they're hearing the feedback. We'll have to wait and see to see how they respond to it, but I think with the live letter, And with interviews like this, Yoshi P and the team behind Final Fantasy XIV really wants us to know they're at least listening. And I think that's a good step in the right direction. With that, I'll call the video there for the day. Thank you all for tuning in. My pleasure making the video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out and helps support future content, and I greatly appreciate it. Leave a comment down below with your thoughts, your opinions. What would you like to see Final Fantasy XIV improve on in the future? Or what would you like to see them double down on? I'd love to hear your thoughts and hear your opinions and hear your perspectives. And while you're down there, go follow me on TikTok, Twitch, and Twitter, Jmulls G. I have a Discord in the description down below. We have plenty more Final Fantasy XIV coverage coming up on the channel, and also just gaming stuff, just in general. A lot of good stuff coming down the pipeline. Hope you join me for the ride. Stay safe, have a great day. I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye, everybody. Until we meet again.